So along with the building of capacity, I want to talk to you about the myth of Milo and then envelope of functions. Those two different kind of concepts, and then how we can kind of work on the building of capacity. And we'll talk about progressive building here in a minute as well. So there's this myth of Milo where Milo, in ancient Greece, young boy, he wanted to progressively load himself, or some people call it overloading. I call it progressive building. Much more debate about all that, but essentially it's like, how do you build up your capacity? He started with a small calf, and so he's smaller. He starts with a small calf. As he gets bigger, he continues to carry a bigger calf and or cow at this point. And so then the point is that he starts with a certain amount of load, and then he continues to build and or progress in that amount of load. And this is called progressive overload. As a general principle, like if you look this up, this is what it's called. Some people would suggest the term progressive loading for various different reasons. So I like kind of take the middle of the road and I go progressive building. And so here is the envelope of function. So kind of keep that concept in mind of the myth of Milo, but look at the concept of envelope of function. This is a concept that was developed by Scott Dye, as a knee surgeon, and he relates it to tissue in the knee, especially before injury, then after injury, or after surgery. And so we'll just take it like this concept can apply to any injury or any even non-injury. So just some general context here is we have frequency on the bottom, and we'll just frequency can be many different things. We'll simply say maybe days of the week, since we have 7. And then load, these are arbitrary numbers for frequency, and these are arbitrary numbers for load. So we'll just say days of the week here, and this will vary depending, is it amount of weight, is it the number of miles somebody runs, those types of things. And so we'll get into that in a little bit. And essentially is what you have different zones, all right? So you have what's called homeostasis. And these are just kind of like arbitrary lines, and these will vary on different people. So don't get caught up on, okay, it goes from a 4 to a 7. These are all arbitrary. Just kind of understand the concept. Homeostasis is essentially, if we're talking about tissue, but we could also put in here, the human being's capacity, but we'll keep with how Scott Dye described it. Homeostasis is, if you twice a week, you put, let's say this is weight. Twice a week, if you put 12 pounds of load on that tissue, the load imparted on that tissue is what it is used to. And it's not making it atrophy, which is down here, and it's not making it get into superphysiological overload. So this is the concept of envelope function. And when, like if I use that same frequency, if I went 2 times a week, but I bumped it up to 25 pounds, now I'm in what's called superphysiological overload. I am doing more than the tissue has its capacity to, but it's not at the point where it's going to get injured. This is kind of where, between the green and the red, wherever these are always going to be different for different people. So one person, these numbers, these lines may be, lower. So the red may be down here, green may be down here, and yellow may be down here. And then for this person, it might be here. Just the concept is the combination of frequency and load is putting somebody either in homeostasis, under load, superphysiological overload, and or in the point where they're at injury. So if you use the concept of myth of Milo, so remember progressive building, progressive loading, carrying a bigger calf over time. We have frequency here, and so like I put these now in purple, so frequency, so kind of make note of that. And then I have load in green. Remember here they were just like arbitrary numbers, and so we're going to go days of the week for frequency, and we're going to go amount of the weight of the calf. And so you got your same zones. So let's say he carries a 15-pound calf. He does it 1 time a week. So his frequency is he carries the calf 1 time a week, and that calf, so that's the frequency. The load is 15 pounds. Doing that repetitively is not going to make him stronger, but it's probably also not going to atrophy his tissue. He's just going to stay where he's at. He's going to stay in homeostasis. If he goes to a 30-pound calf and says, you know what, I do actually want to get stronger, I do want to build, and so he goes, you know what, I'm going to double the weight of the calf, which is probably, in general, not a good idea, and probably could actually put them up here. But let's say, because if they're truly in homeostasis, like you don't really want to double the weight of the calf, and so, but the way I drew it, maybe, you want to do a 21-pound calf or something like that. But he's doing a 30-pound calf, and so now that puts him in super physiological overload and fairly close to his limit. Now if he goes to a 45-pound calf, so note this is in green, all these situations are 1 time a week. 15-pound calf in homeostasis, 30-pound calf in super physiological overload, and then a 45-pound calf now is in an injurious situation. But the reason that he got hurt is because the load was too much. Like he didn't go more times per week. So it's not a frequency problem. It is a load problem. It is the amount of the weight of the calf that is the primary concern in this situation. So now let's switch it to a runner. And so if we have somebody that's running, let's say they run for 1 hour. And, they're very used to running, so they're running 3 days a week and they're running for 1 hour. So this, might be some of us, right? And so we're running 3 days a week. We run 1 mile. Let's say they've been doing that for a long period of time and essentially their body is adapted to that. They've adapted to it. And so now it's just like, they do this, let's say maybe they're doing it for 6 months. Their body's not really overloading and they're not getting better with their VO2 max or whatever they're trying to train. They're kind of staying the same. So you want to either increase the frequency and or the load, and possibly both, but you got to be careful about that. So now he goes, you know what, I'm going to run two hours. Same. So I'm not going to, I don't want to, I work, I can't go more times per week, but 3 days a week, I go in late. I don't have to go in until like 11 o'clock at work. So I'm going to run for 2 hours. So essentially he doubles his load. And you typically don't want it like this. You don't want to double your load, but this is how it plays out in this case. And so now he goes from, that was fine, no problems. I mean, it's like I don't really feel any different, to now he's probably getting some soreness. He's definitely overloading his system. His system's having to adapt, but it's safe. He's not getting injured. So those are things that you want to kind of consider when you're doing those, because then what happens if I go back, if he moved up to, so how he gets up to here is, let's say he stays at the same 2 hours, and he goes, you know what, I want to go 6 days a week, which is a huge jump and probably not what you want. But now I was going to put him in a situation where now he gets injured, but now it's due to a frequency problem. It's not due to the load because the load stayed the same. So this situation is a load problem. This situation over here, which I don't have written out, but if he went 6 days a week, he ran 2 hours, now he has a micro trauma problem. It's doing too much too frequently versus this was, not a frequency problem. It was just like, the load was simply too much. So it's important to know is, do I have a load problem or do I have a frequency problem? Because then when I modify their activities, probably the first thing I'm going to do in the runner's case is decrease the frequency versus this person, I'm going to probably decrease the load. And you may do some combination of both of those. So now if we have a situation here, so this is just another example, is in this case, so both of these situations are going to talk about valgus at the knee. And so we got the same underload, we got homeostasis, overload, and excessive injury. This is a one-time event. This soccer player gets injured, another player fell into him, and he goes into a lot of valgus. And so it wasn't that it happened multiple times. It was that it happened one time, and the load, where maybe normally he can tolerate this load, right? So if he would have fell into him and not, landed down here or landed at his trunk, that wouldn't have caused as much load. So now it went into a lot of load, and now maybe it injures his MCL or ACL or whatever, because it's very quick. It's the magnitude happens very quickly. So this is a quick load type of injury. This would be like jumping off of a high stairs and injuring yourself. One time high magnitude injury. Versus this same runner, who is an elite level marathon runner, goes also into a lot of hours, a lot of foot pronation, and goes into the same type of movement, but how she gets injured is doing it over a period of time. She's maybe running the same distance, she's maybe running the same mileage, maybe 20 miles per week, but maybe she goes from 5 times per week at 20 miles to now she's going to 7 times per week at 20 miles, and now she gets a micro trauma injury. She doesn't potentially blow her knee out, probably doesn't injure multiple ligaments, and it's just that, this injurious strain to the MCL because it can't tolerate the frequency of the load. So that is the concept of envelope of function with using, magnitude of load, frequency of load, but I'm also superimposing what's called the physical stress theory, which talks about the magnitude of the load, how frequently it happens, and in which direction. So let's say both of these, so you look at these 3 variables. So in both of these cases, let's say they go into valgus. So there's medially directed force, there's a medially directed force. But the reason this person gets injured is due to time, versus the reason that this person gets injured is due to magnitude. What happens when you get an injury or a surgery? So these are the same kind of lightened out lines that were there before. So here's your excessive injury, here's your same overload, here's your same yellow line, here's your same homeostasis. So that's what we had normally. Now what happens with an injury or surgery is now where they are, so now the yellow line drops down. It doesn't take as much magnitude or as much frequency to get between the yellow. So remember, the yellow overload was this yellow line to this red line. That was their overload. Now their overload is from this yellow line to this new red line. So essentially overload is in some level of what used to be homeostasis. And now injury, so above this, is mostly in where overload was, because the tissue doesn't tolerate as much capacity, and it doesn't take as much load or as much frequency to cause injury to that tissue. Some things that you want to kind of consider are, what is the person's capacity? How do you determine that? So do you test, with hand-down dynamometry? Do you test strength? Do you look at like how far they can walk? Those kinds of things. What is their tolerance? What can they tolerate in the clinic? Is it a load issue? Is it, the magnitude of the load, and or is it, the number of times that they carry a lighter load? Because remember, intensity, which is essentially magnitude, and frequency are inversely proportional. And then how do you scale each parameter up or down? And then also, like, how do you monitor? So external load. So you want to look at both external load and internal load. If somebody, like, how do you know if somebody's like, okay, that was too much? Well, externally, like if it's a knee injury, probably going to swell up, probably going to get sore, maybe stiffness. They have less range of motion than they did. Like say you saw them on Tuesday and they had 120 degrees of motion. Now they only have 90, and it feels more stiff and it looks more swollen, and they're limping more. It's more irritable. From an internal, so that's what you would see externally. Internally is, what is their pain level, which I don't have on here. And then, like, how hard are these different exercises? What is their RPE? Do they feel rested and recovered? You could ask them on a 0 to 10, like, how recovered do you feel? Are you in homeostasis? Are you in overload? And or are you injured? So overload is, homeostasis is pretty much the same. Overload is they're going to have maybe some delayed onset of muscle soreness. Maybe they're a little bit stiff, but they quickly loosen up. Versus like, micro trauma, maybe they're losing range of motion, maybe it's more swollen over here. It's all those things that I just put on that external load type of thing. All right, everybody. Take care.